The Browning M2, 50 caliber machine gun, affectionately known as Ma Deuce, earned its distinguished moniker with considerable justification. When its inventor, John Moses Browning, finalized its sophisticated design in 1921, he bequeathed to the world what military historians continue to laud as the most triumphant heavy machine gun ever conceived. This formidable weapon possessed the astonishing capability to penetrate and dismantle engine blocks from a remarkable distance of 500 yards, effortlessly tear through light armor plating, and propel a half-inch diameter projectile with devastating force, screaming downrange at an astounding velocity of 2,100 feet per second. Its raw power and destructive potential were unparalleled for its era. By the pivotal year of 1942, the desperate need for these formidable monsters became acutely evident, with every American infantry company operating in the Pacific Theater clamoring for as many units as they could possibly acquire. The mere psychological impact of its presence and distinctive sound was deemed invaluable, truly worth its weight in gold. Japanese soldiers, recognizing its unique and terrifying cadence, bestowed upon it the chilling nickname, the Woodpecker of Death. However, amidst the heroic narratives propagated by recruiting posters, a critical detail remained conspicuously absent. The M2 harbored a profound and potentially fatal flaw, a vulnerability that every machine gunner inevitably learned to dread and respect. Theoretically, this weapon was engineered to unleash a torrent of fire, discharging between 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Yet, in the crucible of actual combat, a gunner could realistically sustain fire for only a meager 90 to 120 seconds before the unyielding laws of physics transformed this invaluable asset into nothing more than a useless, overheated mass of inert metal. The impediment was not a shortage of ammunition. Indeed, a proficiently supplied crew could continue to feed the hungry beast for extended periods. The true, insidious adversary was heat, an omnipresent danger that bore the very real potential of costing lives. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. With each decisive strike of the M2's firing pin upon a primer, 240 grains of potent smokeless powder were ignited, unleashing an explosive force that generated approximately 18,000 foot-pounds of energy. While the vast majority of this formidable energy was efficiently harnessed to propel the bullet forward with incredible momentum, a significant portion, roughly 30%, underwent a direct conversion into thermal energy. Consequently, with every single round discharged, the barrel absorbed approximately 5,400 foot-pounds of intense heat. To illustrate the magnitude of this thermal burden, consider firing 100 rounds in rapid succession. This action would relentlessly pump an astonishing 540,000 foot-pounds of thermal energy into a comparatively slender steel tube, weighing a mere 26 pounds. The cumulative effect of this constant infusion of heat was a relentless climb in temperature, threatening the weapon's structural integrity and operational lifespan under sustained fire. The underlying arithmetic was both straightforward and unforgiving in its implications. Following a mere 2 minutes of continuous, sustained firing, the barrel's internal temperature would surge dramatically, soaring past the critical threshold of 800 degrees Celsius. Should the firing be extended to a perilous 3 minutes, the temperature would flirt precariously with 1,100 degrees beef. At an alarming 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, The very steel comprising the barrel would commence a critical degradation, losing its fundamental structural integrity and becoming dangerously pliable. The Army Ordnance Department, of course, possessed full awareness of this inherent limitation. The technical manual, meticulously issued to every M2 crew, contained explicit, unambiguous warnings prominently displayed in bold lettering, stating unequivocally, "Sustained fire exceeding 2 minutes will result in barrel failure." These instructions were not merely advisory. They were vital directives designed to prevent catastrophic equipment malfunction and potential injury. The repercussions of disregarding this crucial warning spanned a spectrum from merely detrimental to utterly catastrophic. In the most favorable yet still undesirable scenario, the barrel might suffer a slight warping, leading to a severe degradation in accuracy. Bullets would begin to keyhole, tumbling erratically sideways through the air, instead of maintaining a true, stable flight path. In the direst possible outcome, the barrel could violently rupture, projecting lethal shrapnel back towards the gunner's face and permanently disabling the weapon. Occupying the mid-range on this scale of potential disaster, the headspace, that critically precise gap between the bolt face and the barrel, would expand due to extreme thermal deformation, initiating the premature detonation of rounds within the chamber itself. Expert gunsmiths referred to this highly dangerous phenomenon as a cook-off, a terrifying event that could rapidly transform a controlled weapon system into an unpredictable and exceedingly hazardous device. Standard military doctrine was meticulously developed to confront this operational limitation directly and effectively. Every M2 gun position was therefore mandated to possess a readily available spare barrel, and its assigned crew was rigorously trained in the precise and swift barrel change procedure. The established protocol dictated swapping the barrel approximately every 90 seconds. By allowing the intensely hot barrel to cool for a period of 20 minutes, it was theoretically possible to sustain continuous suppressive fire indefinitely. The barrel change itself, for a highly skilled and coordinated crew, could be executed in approximately 30 to 45 seconds, though this duration might extend to 60 seconds when operating in challenging conditions such as darkness or under direct enemy fire. The Army even furnished specialized asbestos gloves, specifically designed for the safe handling of scorching hot barrels, although many combat crews frequently found these gloves to be excessively bulky and cumbersome, often improvising with rags or even their uniform sleeves. However, the efficacy of all these tactical measures hinged upon one absolutely critical assumption: the luxury of having sufficient time to momentarily cease firing. Guadalcanal in November 1942 represented a crucible where the formidable Empire of Japan sought to decisively test whether American forces could be successfully repelled and driven back into the sea. This strategically vital island, roughly 90 miles in length and 25 miles in width, had ascended to become the absolute focal point of the entire Pacific War following the initial landings by Marines on August 7th. By November, the relentless fighting had tragically devolved into a brutal and bloody stalemate, primarily centered around Henderson Field, which stood as the sole operational airstrip within the entire Solomon Islands chain. The belligerent who exerted control over that crucial airstrip would inevitably command the skies, and by extension, the belligerent who controlled the skies would ultimately emerge victorious in the Pacific theater. The Marines had painstakingly established a defensive perimeter around Henderson Field, but this crucial defensive line was stretched precariously thin indeed exceptionally thin. The valiant 1st Marine Division had been engaged in continuous combat for 3 grueling months, enduring daily casualties, and the arrival of much-needed reinforcements was proving to be agonizingly slower than the rate at which their brave men were falling. On the ominous night of November 12th, intelligence reports began to filter in, unequivocally indicating that a major Japanese offensive was imminent. These reports proved tragically accurate. What those initial assessments failed to adequately capture, however, was the sheer, overwhelming scale of the impending assault. This was not to be merely a probing attack or a harassment mission designed to test defenses. Imperial General Headquarters had committed the entirety of the 38th Infantry Division, comprising fresh, well-trained troops recently arrived from Japan, with explicit and uncompromising orders to breach the American lines and retake Henderson Field at any conceivable cost. Marine Corporal Anthony Stein, affectionately known to his squad mates as Tony, steadfastly held a critical position on a topographical feature designated on maps as Hill 132, although universally referred to by the troops as Henderson Ridge. This ridge constituted a formidable natural barrier on the southern approach leading directly to the airfield, its elevation approximately 50 feet above the surrounding dense jungle terrain. Corporal Stein's formidable M2, 50 caliber machine gun, was strategically positioned to provide overwhelming covering fire over a natural draw, a distinct natural corridor situated between 2 adjacent higher hills, where the dense vegetation thinned out just enough to create an exposed kill zone, extending approximately 80 yards in depth and 40 yards in width. Military analysts would later unequivocally describe this as a textbook defensive position, a testament to its tactical advantage. However, Stein, with the grim pragmatism of a combat veteran, privately referred to it as a death trap, for he knew that if the Japanese were to advance through that draw in significant force, his small 3-man gun crew would represent the sole impediment preventing them from completely overwhelming and rolling up the entire right flank of the American defensive line. The ferocious attack commenced precisely at 0230 hours on the morning of November 13th. There was no preceding artillery preparation, no discernible warning whatsoever, merely indistinct shapes materializing and moving with chilling purpose in the profound darkness. There were many such shapes, advancing with the kind of unwavering discipline that is characteristic of professional soldiers who have undergone years of rigorous collective training. The 38th Division was by no means composed of green, inexperienced troops. These men possessed extensive combat experience garnered in the brutal campaigns of Manchuria and China. They were seasoned veterans who understood their grim task implicitly. Stein's vigilant assistant gunner, Private Eddie Morrison, was the first to discern their shadowy forms through the gloom, estimating with a sinking feeling that at least 200 men were forming up within the tree line, possibly even more. They were heavily equipped with Bangalore torpedoes, specifically designed to breach the formidable wire defenses, scaling ladders prepared for crossing the entrenched defensive trenches, and an ample supply of small arms ammunition, sufficient to sustain a prolonged and determined assault for many hours. The impending engagement promised to be a protracted and brutal affair, lasting potentially for many hours. It was at this critical juncture that the strategic calculations facing the machine gunner Stein became alarmingly grim. Conventional military protocols for defense mandated the use of brief, disciplined bursts of fire, typically comprising 5 to 7 rounds, followed by a momentary cessation for battlefield evaluation. This methodical approach was designed to economize on precious ammunition, mitigate the risk of the weapon's barrel overheating, and ensure the sustained operational integrity of the firearm. However, Stein possessed a keen tactical foresight, discerning the dire nature of the unfolding scenario. He recognized that the customary practice of controlled bursts would prove utterly insufficient against the formidable threat materializing before him. The Japanese forces were clearly consolidating their strength, preparing for a relentless human wave assault, a tactic characterized by an unyielding advance, irrespective of the staggering casualties incurred, until they either breached the defensive perimeter or were utterly annihilated. Should Stein adhere to the doctrine of short bursts, a sufficient number of Japanese combatants would inevitably survive the lethal gauntlet of the kill zone, successfully breaching his defensive emplacement. Once these enemy forces bypassed his formidable weapon, they would find themselves positioned perilously behind the primary defensive line, with only fragmented rifle squads offering a meager resistance between them and the vital airfield. Stein's tactical resources included a pair of supplementary barrels for his heavy machine gun. Adhering strictly to established military guidelines, these spares would afford him approximately 6 minutes of cumulative firing duration, meticulously distributed across a half-hour span of intense combat, taking into careful consideration the necessary intervals for barrel replacement and cooling. His dedicated loader, Private First Class Jack Chen, had meticulously arranged a formidable supply of 12 ammunition cans containing a total of 600 rounds, all conveniently within arm's reach. Furthermore, additional ammunition was readily available, with designated runners poised to deliver fresh supplies as required. Clearly, the availability of ammunition was not the primary concern in this desperate situation. The critical, overarching challenge was the finite nature of time itself. Stein was acutely aware that the sheer magnitude of the advancing assault force would necessitate a minimum of 8 to 10 minutes of uninterrupted concentrated fire to effectively neutralize the threat. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment below telling us where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The meticulous engineers at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, the principal producers of M2 barrels throughout the Second World War, employed a sophisticated steel alloy identified as SAE 450 for this crucial component. This particular chromium molybdenum steel was deliberately selected for its exceptional resilience and inherent capacity to endure numerous cycles of extreme thermal stress, while preserving its fundamental structural integrity under immense operational pressures. Under ambient conditions, SAE 4150 exhibited an impressive tensile strength, registering approximately 125,000 pounds per square inch. The intricate manufacturing journey commenced with the precision gun drilling of a solid steel billet, followed by the careful rifling of its interior with 4 distinct grooves, engineered with a right-hand twist of 1 turn every 15 inches. Upon completion of these critical steps, the finished barrel underwent a rigorous heat treatment regimen. It was first heated to a searing 350 degrees, subsequently quenched in oil to rapidly cool and harden, and then tempered at 800 degrees. This precise metallurgical process imparted to the barrel its specific and vital hardness rating, ranging between Rockwell C28 and 32, a characteristic essential for its battlefield performance. It was precisely at this juncture that the intricate principles of material science transcended academic theory and became an immediate, life-or-death concern on the battlefield. The specialized heat treatment applied to the steel created a unique microstructure within the metal, endowing it with a capacity to manage thermal stress, but only up to a certain critical threshold. Beyond this point, the mechanical characteristics of the steel would predictably diminish, following a clear degradation curve as its temperature steadily ascended. For instance, at a temperature of 600 degrees, the SAE 4150 steel would still retain approximately 90% of its initial room temperature strength. However, as the temperature climbed to 900 degrees, this retention plummeted to just 70%. A further increase to 1,100 degrees meant a critical loss of half its original strength. Most alarmingly, at 1,200 degrees, a temperature that M2 barrels were known to achieve after merely 150 to 180 seconds of continuous, sustained firing, the steel astonishingly preserved only 40% of its initial tensile strength, despite appearing visually intact and still composed of solid metal. The barrel was, in fact, severely compromised structurally, a condition that could manifest its devastating consequences without warning, instantly, and catastrophically. The specific manners in which these barrels could fail were diverse and varied, yet experienced gunners invariably developed a keen ability to discern the crucial premonitory indicators. The initial and most discernible sign of impending trouble was a marked degradation in firing accuracy. As the barrel's temperature escalated and the metal expanded, the finely engineered rifling grooves within its bore would microscopically widen, consequently diminishing the bullet's vital stabilizing spin. Projectiles that were ordinarily expected to impact within a precise 6-inch grouping at a range of 100 yards would begin to scatter widely, impacting within an erratic 18 or even 24-inch spread. Furthermore, tracer rounds, which were strategically integrated as every fifth round within standard M2 ammunition belts, would cease their predictable straight trajectories, instead charting peculiar arcing paths through the atmosphere. Astute gunners maintained a vigilant watch over these tracers. Their spiraling flight patterns served as an urgent visual alarm, signaling that perhaps only 20 seconds remained before more severe and potentially catastrophic issues would begin to manifest. Following closely on the heels of accuracy issues, the next critical concern to emerge was the dangerous phenomenon of headspace alteration. This particular problem introduced an immediate and rapidly escalating peril. The headspace on an M2 machine gun referred to the precisely calibrated gap existing between the face of the bolt and the base of the cartridge once a round was correctly chambered. This crucial dimension was meticulously set at 0.063 inches, a measurement roughly equivalent to the combined thickness of 2 sheets of standard paper. However, as the barrel heated intensely and underwent thermal expansion, this vital gap inevitably widened. Should this expansion exceed acceptable tolerances, the cartridge case would lose its essential structural support precisely when the firing pin initiated ignition. The primer would detonate, internal pressures would surge dramatically, and the now unsupported brass case would violently rupture. In some instances, this could merely lead to frustrating extraction failures and weapon jams, temporarily incapacitating the gun. More gravely, it often resulted in superheated gases and sharp brass fragments being violently ejected backward through the receiver, posing a direct and severe threat to the gunner's face and person. The most catastrophic potential outcome, however, was the dreaded thermal runaway, a truly terrifying malfunction. Under conditions of extreme and prolonged heat, the weapons chamber itself could become so intensely hot that it would spontaneously ignite the propellant powder within a chambered round, entirely circumventing the need for the firing pin to strike the primer. This phenomenon, known as a cook-off, would cause the round to discharge, subsequently chambering the next round, which would then also cook off, initiating an uncontrollable sequence. This created a runaway gun that would fire relentlessly and without any operator input until the entire ammunition belt was expended. Such a scenario rendered the weapon unstoppable. The trigger mechanism became utterly meaningless. The sole recourse available to the gunner was to physically sever or break the ammunition belt. Yet, in the throes of active combat, executing such a desperate measure might prove neither practical nor safe, leaving the crew in an incredibly vulnerable position. Official after-action reports compiled by the Marine Corps from the ferocious battles on Guadalcanal meticulously catalogued a total of 23 distinct occurrences of M2 barrel failures during the initial 3 months of sustained hostilities. A significant portion of these, specifically 7 incidents, culminated in the complete and catastrophic rupture of the barrel itself. Furthermore, 4 of these malfunctions led to severe injuries sustained by the dedicated gun crews operating the weapons. In one especially harrowing and tragic event recorded on October 8, 1942, a cook-off incident proved fatal to a corporal serving with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. The uncontrolled firing of the runaway gun caused it to inadvertently traverse its mount, sweeping a deadly volley of rounds across his own defensive position, highlighting the extreme dangers inherent in such equipment failures. On the fateful date of November 13, 1942, Anthony Peter Stein had reached the age of 23, a fact that positioned him among the more senior members within his combat squad. His formative years were spent in Dayton, Ohio, where his father was employed as a skilled tool and die maker at the esteemed National Cash Register Company. Young Tony, following in his father's footsteps, embarked upon a career in machining, dedicating 3 years to mastering the intricate craft of precision metalwork prior to the outbreak of the global conflict. This particular vocational background proved to be far more significant than anyone could have initially comprehended, as Stein possessed an innate, intuitive comprehension of complex machinery that was remarkably uncommon for someone his age. He intimately understood the behavior of various metals when subjected to immense stress. He had personally witnessed steel distort and warp under intense heat, observed critical tolerances fluctuate as metallic components expanded, and, crucially, he had assimilated the knowledge of how to operate effectively within or ingeniously circumvent these inherent material limitations. Stein had proudly joined the ranks of the Marine Corps in January 1942, subsequently undergoing the rigorous training at Parris Island's demanding boot camp. Following this foundational instruction, he was assigned to the distinguished 1st Marine Division, where he served as a machine gunner. The Corps, recognizing his exceptional mechanical aptitude, deliberately placed him in charge of the formidable M2 heavy machine gun. Indeed, his weapons platoon sergeant, after a cursory review of Stein's civilian employment history, succinctly declared, "You're on the 50." By November of that pivotal year, Stein had accumulated extensive experience, having discharged an estimated 8,000 rounds through various M2s during both intensive training exercises and actual combat engagements. Consequently, he possessed an intimate understanding of the weapon's idiosyncratic behaviors, its inherent formidable strengths, and its fundamental operational limitations, perhaps even more profoundly than he understood his personal service rifle. As he now stood poised behind that powerful weapon, his gaze fixed on the indistinct forms multiplying within the encroaching darkness, his intellect was rapidly processing a complex series of calculations that were less about raw bravery and more about the stark, unforgiving realities of arithmetic and mechanical endurance. The intricate calculations and strategic foresight necessary for survival on the battlefield were not merely matters of instinct, but rather precise applications of arithmetic. Positioned to defend against an impending enemy surge, the kill zone directly before Stein's firing point extended for roughly 80 yards. Japanese infantry, advancing at a measured tactical pace across the rugged and broken terrain, would traverse this critical distance in approximately 90 to 120 seconds. However, the enemy was not approaching as a singular, monolithic force. Stein's discerning gaze picked out multiple lines of troops arrayed for assault. The standard Japanese doctrine for such an offensive maneuver dictated successive waves, each separated by an interval of approximately 20 yards. This predetermined spacing meant that even if the initial wave were successfully halted, the subsequent wave would bear down upon their position merely 30 seconds later, followed by a third and then a fourth, in relentless succession. Morrison, Stein's diligent assistant gunner, had meticulously tallied at least 200 men congregating in the assembly area, with a more realistic estimate placing their numbers closer to 250. Given that Japanese infantry squads typically comprised 13-man sections, they were confronting a formidable force of roughly 18 to 20 such sections preparing for the assault. While not every one of these enemy formations would funnel through Stein's designated kill zone, as some would undoubtedly strike other sectors of the defensive line. At a minimum, half of them were projected to do so. This translated to an imperative to neutralize between 100 to 125 men. Right at this critical juncture, for failure to do so would inevitably result in a catastrophic breach of their defenses. The venerable M2 heavy machine gun, a formidable instrument of war, possessed a cyclic rate of fire ranging from 450 to 600 rounds per minute, depending on the operator's manipulation of the trigger mechanism. Stein, a seasoned combatant, typically maintained an operational rate of approximately 500 rounds per minute during engagements, a pace optimized for sustained effectiveness rather than the theoretical maximum cyclic rate. To incapacitate 100 enemy combatants, assuming each individual required an average expenditure of 4 to 5 rounds to ensure a kill or a debilitating wound, he would need to unleash approximately 400 to 500 rounds downrange. At his established rate of 500 rounds per minute, this equated to 50 to 60 seconds of continuous trigger time. However, this calculation was predicated upon an idealized scenario of perfect accuracy and the absence of suppressive fire, a notion that was, in the brutal reality of combat, pure fantasy. Actual engagements demanded at least double that amount, perhaps 800 to 1,000 rounds in total, to account for unavoidable misses, the necessity of suppressive fire to pin down the enemy, and the stark truth that soldiers rarely succumb to a single hit. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please comment below where you are from and what you think about this video's topic. The unfolding arithmetic painted an increasingly grim picture. An expenditure of 800 rounds at a rate of 500 rounds per minute necessitated 96 seconds of sustained, continuous fire. Incorporating the additional time required to traverse the weapon, methodically engaging targets across the entire breadth of the kill zone, pushed the minimum engagement time to approximately 2 minutes. Yet, the Japanese offensive was structured in successive waves, not a single simultaneous rush. The entire assault was projected to endure for at least 5 minutes from the initial contact to the final disposition of the last enemy soldier, whether dead or driven back. To sustain an effective volume of fire throughout this critical 5-minute window, meticulously accounting for the necessary barrel changes, Stein would, in fact, need to maintain active firing for a cumulative duration of approximately 8 to 10 minutes. He possessed a total of 3 barrels. Standard operational procedure allocated him 6 minutes of firing time, distributed judiciously over a 30-minute period. He was already facing a deficit of at least 2 minutes, potentially 4 minutes if the situation deteriorated, and in combat, circumstances invariably took a turn for the worse. Stein arrived at his momentous decision in a mere 5 seconds, the scant window of opportunity he had before the Japanese began their relentless advance. The action he was about to undertake flagrantly contravened every technical manual, every regulation, and every piece of official doctrine ever promulgated by the Marine Corps regarding the M2 Browning machine gun. Nevertheless, his unorthodox solution was firmly rooted in sound thermodynamic principles, concepts that any skilled machinist would intuitively grasp, even if every commissioned officer in the Marine Corps would have subjected him to a court-martial for merely vocalizing such a proposition. At the core of Stein's radical plan lay the concept of evaporative cooling. This fundamental physical phenomenon, responsible for the sensation of coldness experienced upon exiting a swimming pool on a blustery day, is remarkably efficient. When liquid water undergoes a phase transition to vapor, it absorbs an immense quantity of energy, approximately 540 calories per gram, at sea level. This substantial latent heat of vaporization elucidates why perspiration effectively cools the human body, and why pouring water onto scorching pavement produces a distinct sizzling sound. When a liquid is applied to a superheated metal surface, an extraordinarily efficient mechanism for heat transfer is initiated. The liquid readily absorbs thermal energy from the incandescent metal, transforms into steam, and subsequently carries that absorbed energy away into the surrounding atmosphere. By 1942, industrial machining operations had routinely employed liquid cooling techniques for many decades. Cutting tools, drill bits, and milling machines, all integral components of modern manufacturing, operated with a constant flow of coolant to mitigate the risk of thermal damage and premature wear. Typically, this coolant comprised a mixture of water and soluble oil. But in dire emergency situations, plain water proved perfectly adequate. Stein, drawing upon his formative experiences at the National Cash Register Company, was intimately familiar with these principles. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences when coolant pumps failed. Tools would rapidly overheat and fail within seconds. He had also observed resourceful machinists improvising emergency cooling systems using whatever liquid was at hand, including some remarkably creative solutions that would never find their way into official instructional manuals. The practical challenge of cooling an M2 barrel in the crucible of combat revolved around a simple logistical constraint: the absolute necessity of a liquid. This liquid needed to be immediately accessible, and a substantial quantity of it was required. From a purely thermodynamic perspective, water was the ideal choice. However, on the unforgiving island of Guadalcanal, water was an extraordinarily precious commodity. Canteens were reserved for sustaining life, not for the profligate cooling of weaponry. Attempting to transport water cans to a forward fighting position solely for the purpose of cooling a gun barrel would inevitably lead to a thorough and uncomfortable explanation to every officer from their immediate command all the way up to division headquarters. Moreover, in the chaotic maelstrom of a nocturnal assault, one was compelled to utilize whatever resources were within arm's reach. What Stein and his comrades had within arm's reach was urine, his own, Morrison's, Chen's, and that of any other Marine in their immediate vicinity. Human urine is comprised of approximately 95% water, with the remaining 5% consisting of dissolved urea, creatinine, uric acid, and various mineral salts. From the critical perspective of heat transfer, it is nearly as effective as pure water. In fact, the dissolved solutes actually contribute to a slight elevation of its boiling point. While pure water boils at 212 degrees, urine typically boils at around 214 degrees to 215 degrees. However, at barrel temperatures exceeding 1 Dow at 100 degrees, this marginal 2 degree difference was utterly insignificant. The liquid would instantaneously flash to steam regardless. The specific chemical composition of urine did, admittedly, introduce certain complications. Urea, under conditions of extreme heat, decomposes into ammonia and carbon dioxide, a process that would undoubtedly generate a distinctly unpleasant and pungent odor. The dissolved salts could, theoretically, leave behind residue deposits within the barrel. Although at the incandescent temperatures involved, most organic compounds would simply combust and dissipate. The uric acid might potentially contribute to minor corrosion issues over time. However, these were concerns for another day. The immediate and paramount problem was ensuring the barrel remained cool enough to continue firing. Marine Corps regulations explicitly forbade the very action Stein was contemplating, though the precise wording of this prohibition was somewhat obscurely located within Technical Manual TM 9-1052-13, specifically under the section titled Unauthorized Cooling Methods. The manual unequivocally stated, "Under no circumstances should gunners attempt to cool barrels using non-approved liquids, including seawater, alcohol, petroleum products, or bodily fluids. Such practices may cause permanent damage to barrel surfaces and create unsafe operating conditions." This regulation had been established because previous conflicts had irrefutably demonstrated that soldiers, driven by desperation, would attempt virtually anything. And tragically, some of those desperate measures only served to exacerbate already dire situations rather than ameliorating them. Corporal Stein, far from being concerned with mere regulations, was singularly preoccupied with the fundamental principles of mathematics and physics, all while confronting the immediate, terrifying reality of 200 Japanese soldiers poised to overrun his position. The relentless torrent of bullets commenced at precisely 2:37 hours, unleashing 35 rounds that tore through the leading Japanese detachment, with the brutal efficiency of a cutting tool slicing through brittle bamboo. Stein expertly manipulated the weapon's trigger in meticulously controlled bursts, allowing ingrained muscle memory to guide his adjustments to the traversing and elevation mechanisms. Meanwhile, his intellect was consumed by a more pressing tactical dilemma. He estimated he had approximately 90 seconds before the weapon's barrel would require replacement. Morrison, anticipating this critical juncture, had already positioned an empty ammunition container beside the formidable gun, a testament to the brief, whispered instructions Stein had imparted, a rapid exchange of words that likely transgressed several articles of military justice. Despite the devastating initial volley, the Japanese forces continued their determined advance. For them, retreat was not an option. A night assault, once initiated, demanded an unwavering commitment, and the second wave was already surging forward, even as the remnants of the first wave fell or sought cover. Stein continued his lethal work, directing another 40 rounds into the dense formation of approaching enemy combatants, meticulously sweeping his fire from the left flank to the right across the designated kill zone. Each discharge from the muzzle momentarily illuminated the oppressive darkness of the night, like a blinding strobe light, momentarily obliterating his own night vision. But, for fleeting half-second intervals, revealing his targets with chilling clarity. In those stark, illuminated flashes, he observed a grim tapestry of human visages, youthful countenances, faces etched with grim determination, and others contorted in sheer terror. Yet he maintained his relentless barrage. As the engagement reached the 92-second mark, the weapon's barrel was rapidly approaching a critically high temperature. Stein could distinctly perceive the intense heat radiating from the machine gun, even through his standard firing posture. The tracers, those luminous indicators of projectile trajectory, had begun to exhibit a slight spiraling deviation, a crucial telltale sign that the rifling within the barrel was losing its effective grip on the departing bullets. With a powerful shout of "barrel," barely audible above the deafening percussive hammering of the gun, Stein alerted Morrison, whose hands were already poised over the barrel release mechanism. The conventional procedure for a barrel change mandated that the gunner first lift the barrel locking pin, then rotate it 90 degrees, and finally withdraw the spent barrel towards the rear of the weapon. As we delve deeper into this gripping account of battlefield ingenuity, we invite you to stay with us and witness the full unfolding of this extraordinary narrative. We would be immensely grateful for your support through a like and subscription. Please also consider sharing where you are from and your thoughts on the pivotal topic of unconventional tactics in combat in the comments below. Morrison, a testament to countless hours of rigorous practice, executed this precise maneuver in an astonishing 12 seconds. Chen, equally prepared, stood ready with the empty ammunition can. Not the one filled with fresh rounds, but the one specifically designated for this critical operation. Stein swiftly grasped the searing hot barrel from Morrison's extended hands, holding it horizontally, as Chen expertly poured the contents of the can directly onto the superheated steel. The ensuing effect was both instantaneous and profoundly dramatic. The liquid, upon contacting metal that registered somewhere significantly north of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, vaporized into steam with such explosive rapidity that it produced a sharp, hissing sound akin to a pressure cooker vigorously venting its contents. A dense, billowing cloud of thick white vapor erupted from the barrel, carrying a pungent, metallic aroma, precisely as one would anticipate. Stein then rotated the barrel, ensuring that Chen's cooling agent reached every surface, facilitating an even dissipation of heat. This entire improvised process was completed in a mere 8 seconds. Steam was still visibly rising from the rapidly cooling barrel when Morrison decisively slammed the fresh, pre-loaded barrel into its housing and securely locked it into position. The total duration of weapon downtime amounted to a remarkably brief 20 seconds. Stein immediately returned to the trigger, resuming his barrage into the second wave of Japanese attackers who had, during that critical 20-second interlude, managed to close the distance by another 15 yards. He expended another 80 rounds, observing the enemy ranks visibly thin under the concentrated fire, yet they conspicuously failed to break formation. Their resolve was unyielding, their commitment absolute. Their command structure had undoubtedly impressed upon them that this particular assault represented the definitive breakthrough, the pivotal moment that would ultimately reclaim Henderson Field and decisively alter the trajectory of the entire conflict. They believed it with an intensity that compelled them to press on. The atmospheric conditions within the gun position were truly atrocious. The acrid scent of ammonia emanating from decomposing urea mingled with the sharp metallic tang of cordite smoke and the distinct, unnerving aroma of vaporized steel. This noxious cocktail created an environment so oppressive it would induce gagging in anyone not entirely preoccupied with the immediate imperative of survival. Stein's eyes streamed with tears, a physiological response partly attributed to the chemical assault on his sinuses and partly to the pervasive smoke and blinding muzzle flashes. Yet, he remained undeterred. The machine gun continued its relentless operation, consistently placing rounds on target, and in that moment, that singular fact was the only thing that held any meaning. At the 4-minute mark of the relentless engagement, Stein was already executing his second barrel change. The initial barrel, having undergone its emergency cooling and subsequent rotation, had been resting for 3 minutes and was now prepared to be reintroduced into service. As a precautionary measure, Chen administered another application of liquid cooling, producing yet another spectacular cloud of steam that momentarily enveloped and obscured the entire gun position. The Japanese forces, witnessing these recurring plumes of vapor, must have been left to ponder the nature of the formidable new weapon the Americans had so unexpectedly deployed against them. The entire engagement, from the very first shot fired to the last, spanned a remarkable 9 minutes and 40 seconds. During this intense period, Stein discharged a staggering total of 847 rounds, systematically rotating through his 3 available barrels for 4 complete cycles, with Chen diligently performing the emergency cooling procedure on each barrel twice. Throughout this sustained and unconventional operation, the gun never once jammed, never misfired, and never experienced a single mechanical failure. When the last Japanese soldier either succumbed to the relentless fire or retreated back into the concealing embrace of the jungle darkness, Stein's hands trembled so uncontrollably that he found himself unable to light a cigarette. Morrison, ever attentive, had to perform the simple act for him. The sun finally ascended above the horizon a full 6 hours later, casting its revealing light upon the grim testament to their night's work. Bodies were arrayed in overlapping rows across the kill zone, their density greatest at approximately 40 yards out, precisely where the second and third waves of attackers had tragically collided with the casualties of the initial assault. The division's graves registration unit dedicated 2 arduous days to meticulously cataloging the deceased in front of Stein's position. The official tally recorded 73 confirmed enemy personnel killed in action, directly attributed to the M2 machine gun emplacement on Henderson Ridge. An additional 15 to 20 probable kills were noted, based on blood trails leading back into the dense jungle, though no physical bodies were recovered for these instances. Captured Japanese soldiers from the 38th Division later recounted that their commanding officers had specifically identified Stein's formidable gun position as the intended breakthrough point, harboring the misguided expectation that it could be overwhelmed through sheer force of numbers. Their strategic assessment, however, proved to be tragically mistaken. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Puller, the esteemed commander of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, personally inspected the position at 0800 hours. Puller was already a living legend within the Marine Corps, a recipient of 2 Navy Crosses, renowned for his utterly fearless demeanor, and possessing a command philosophy that masterfully blended unwavering professionalism with a profound disregard for anything that did not directly contribute to winning battles. He surveyed the grim body count, then turned his gaze to Stein's weapon, and finally to the empty ammunition can resting beside the position, one of which still contained a visible pool of liquid at its bottom. Puller dipped his finger into the substance, brought it to his nose, sniffed it cautiously, and then uttered a remark that has since been chronicled in at least 6 distinct versions across various historical accounts. The most suitable printable rendition of his query was, "Corporal, what in the name of God is this?" Stein, with remarkable composure, proceeded to explain everything: the intricate thermal calculations, the underlying principle of evaporative cooling, and the highly unconventional emergency barrel cooling procedure that had enabled the weapon to sustain continuous fire for nearly 10 minutes straight. Puller listened intently, his expression remaining utterly neutral, while Morrison and Chen stood rigidly at attention, silently bracing themselves for immediate arrest. Following the extraordinary actions, the scene unfolded with Sergeant Puller approaching the M2 heavy machine gun, his hand tracing the length of its barrel, which remained securely mounted in the weapon. His inspection revealed an intriguing anomaly. While the barrel displayed discernible discoloration and some superficial staining, there was a notable absence of any structural deformation, outright breakage, or indeed any indications of the catastrophic system failure that, by all conventional understanding, should have occurred under such duress. The resilience of the weapon, defying expectations, immediately piqued his seasoned military curiosity. The precise sequence of events that transpired next is subject to varying historical accounts. Some narratives suggest that Sergeant Puller promptly initiated the paperwork for a Silver Star commendation for Corporal Stein. Conversely, other reports indicate he first submitted a formal incident report, thereby instigating an official inquiry by the division's ordnance specialists. However, what is definitively recorded within the archives of the 1st Marine Division is Puller's submission on November 15, 1942, of a commendation report specifically citing Corporal Stein's extraordinary initiative and technical innovation under combat conditions. This initial commendation embarked on its journey through the military hierarchy, evolving into a recommendation for a Bronze Star, a recognition that was subsequently elevated to a Silver Star by the esteemed Major General Alexander Vandergrift himself, acknowledging the profound impact of Stein's ingenuity. Yet, despite the valor recognized, the Marine Corps, as an institution, found itself in a state of profound apprehension. Barely a week later, Corporal Stein received a summons to division headquarters, where he was instructed to reenact his unconventional cooling technique for a distinguished panel. This formidable assembly included 2 lieutenant colonels representing ordnance and a major from the Judge Advocate General's office. The JAG officer wasted no time in unequivocally stating that any unauthorized alterations to established weapons procedures constituted a direct violation of Article 92 of the Articles of War, specifically categorized as failure to obey lawful orders or regulations. The potential consequences for such an infraction were severe, ranging from a reduction in military rank to a dishonorable discharge from service, with the ultimate penalty contingent upon the specific circumstances and the discretionary power of the command. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. In stark contrast to the legalistic concerns, the ordnance officers on the panel expressed a fervent desire for empirical data and detailed insights. To facilitate a thorough examination, they arrived equipped with a dedicated demonstration M2 machine gun, a precise chronograph for measuring muzzle velocity, and an ample supply of ammunition to conduct comprehensive live fire tests. They requested Corporal Stein to meticulously replicate his cooling procedure a total of 6 times, during which they assiduously recorded critical metrics such as barrel temperature, the exact timing of the process, and its overall effectiveness. The findings derived from this pivotal November 1942 demonstration were subsequently classified as restricted and formally documented in Ordnance Report 0421-1173, a crucial piece of military history that remained under wraps until its eventual declassification in 1967. The revelations unearthed by these rigorous tests unequivocally challenged and fundamentally contradicted 2 decades of entrenched military doctrine concerning machine gun barrel cooling protocols. Utilizing advanced thermocouple probes, the ordnance officers precisely measured the barrel's temperature both before and immediately after the application of Stein's liquid-based cooling method. A barrel heated to a searing 1500 degrees was observed to plummet to 680 degrees in approximately 15 seconds when subjected to Stein's innovative technique. For comparative purposes, allowing that same barrel to cool from 1500 degrees to 680 degrees through conventional air cooling alone necessitated a painstaking 7 minutes and 20 seconds. This staggering disparity highlighted that the liquid cooling method was, astoundingly, roughly 29 times more efficient in achieving rapid temperature reduction. The subsequent chemical analysis of the method yielded a complex, somewhat mixed assessment. It was confirmed that the decomposition of urea indeed produced ammonia vapor, which was both intrinsically unpleasant and posed a potential respiratory hazard, particularly within confined operational environments. Furthermore, the dissolved salts present in the liquid left microscopic residues within the barrel, theoretically capable of compromising projectile accuracy over numerous repeated applications. However, crucially, the barrels exhibited no signs of warping, cracking, or any form of structural degradation. The rapid thermal decline did induce a phenomenon known as thermal shock, characterized by the sudden contraction of the steel. Yet the robust SAE 4150 chromium molybdenum steel proved remarkably resilient, demonstrating sufficient integrity to withstand these extreme stresses. After enduring 6 complete cooling cycles, the test barrel displayed only 0.03 inches of measurable wear beyond what would be considered normal from standard firing, a figure comfortably falling within acceptable operational tolerances. The Marine Corps, therefore, found itself grappling with a profound institutional conundrum. On one hand, officially sanctioning a procedure involving urination on machine guns was an administrative impossibility. The public perception, or optics, of such a directive were undeniably appalling, and the legitimate health and hygiene concerns were very real. Moreover, attempting to justify such an unconventional method to congressional committees during critical appropriations hearings was an unimaginable political nightmare. Yet, on the other hand, the compelling efficacy of the results could not be simply ignored. Corporal Stein had achieved what every technical manual deemed impossible: sustained high-volume fire that demonstrably exceeded the weapon's theoretical endurance limits without incurring catastrophic failure. The eventual resolution to this perplexing situation was, in characteristic fashion, bureaucratically pragmatic. The official stance was one of non-endorsement, meaning the practice was not approved. Yet, simultaneously, no disciplinary action, such as a court-martial, was pursued against anyone involved. The incident was instead subtly acknowledged and quietly integrated into training materials, serving as a cautionary yet illustrative example of unauthorized field modifications. It was conveyed that while such improvisations might prove effective under highly specific, dire combat circumstances, they remained strictly prohibited under standard operating procedures. The profound and lasting change, however, manifested in the fundamental doctrine surrounding the allocation and rapid changing of spare barrels. Prior to the crucible of Guadalcanal, most M2 machine gun positions typically carried only a single spare barrel. In the wake of Guadalcanal's harsh lessons, this standard was dramatically elevated, requiring a minimum of 2 spare barrels, with 3 becoming the norm whenever logistical conditions permitted. Concurrently, the emphasis placed on the speed and efficiency of barrel changes intensified exponentially. Training cycles that had previously dedicated a mere 2 hours to barrel-changing drills were significantly expanded, now allocating a comprehensive 8 hours to these critical exercises. Marines were rigorously drilled in executing barrel changes blindfolded while wearing gas masks and under simulated enemy fire until they could consistently perform the procedure in under 20 seconds. The post-war evolution and widespread adoption of quick-change barrel systems directly trace their lineage and owe an undeniable debt to pivotal incidents like Corporal Stein's battlefield innovation. The M2HB model, which formally entered service in 1945, notably incorporated an enhanced barrel release mechanism designed to streamline the changing process, effectively reducing the necessary time from an original 30-45 seconds to a far more efficient 15 to 20 seconds. The M60 machine gun, introduced to the arsenal in 1957, was conceived and engineered from its very inception with rapid barrel changes as a paramount design requirement, achieving an average change time of a mere 8 seconds with a proficient crew. Subsequent weapon systems, such as the M240 and M249, further solidified this doctrinal approach, treating the barrel as a readily consumable component that crews were expected to swap multiple times throughout a single combat engagement to maintain sustained firepower. Military research into advanced barrel cooling methodologies persisted throughout the Cold War era. In 1954, the renowned Aberdeen Proving Ground conducted a series of classified tests meticulously exploring various emergency cooling techniques. These included, but were not limited to, the application of water, oil, compressed air, and indeed even urine. The conclusive results from these extensive evaluations unequivocally corroborated Corporal Stein's earlier empirical findings. Liquid cooling was demonstrably effective. It worked with remarkable speed, and crucially, it did not inflict any destructive damage upon the barrel itself. These tests also investigated the strategic utility of pre-positioning water containers at established defensive positions specifically for the purpose of barrel cooling, a practical measure that subsequently became a standard operational practice within Vietnam-era military doctrine. Tony Stein, the courageous innovator, not only survived the brutal campaign of Guadalcanal, but continued to fight gallantly through the entirety of the Pacific Theater. His exceptional bravery earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant at Bougainville in 1943. He endured the unforgiving hell of Peleliu in 1944 and made his legendary landing with the 5th Marine Division at Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. On that notorious black sand beach, Stein, with unparalleled heroism, led 8 distinct charges against entrenched Japanese pillboxes, personally destroying 4 enemy positions and fearlessly evacuating wounded Marines under intense enemy fire. Tragically, he was killed by sniper fire on the 3rd day of that ferocious battle. In recognition of his extraordinary valor and ultimate sacrifice, President Harry Truman posthumously awarded him the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The recipient was honored with the Medal of Honor, bestowed posthumously. While the official commendation lauded his exceptional bravery and remarkable valor, it conspicuously omitted any reference to the pivotal engagement at Henderson Ridge or the harrowing night when he ingeniously sustained continuous fire from a heavy machine gun for a full 10 minutes. This incredible feat was achieved solely through an intuitive grasp of physics, sheer desperation, and whatever unconventional liquids were at hand to cool the weapon. The venerable M2 Browning machine gun, bearing the unique serial number 324775, which was instrumental in that momentous 1942 encounter, remarkably endured the entirety of World War II. Its service continued steadfastly through the Korean War, demonstrating an unparalleled resilience. Before its eventual retirement from active duty in 1968, having discharged an astonishing estimated 400,000 rounds throughout its distinguished career. Today, this historic firearm is reverently displayed at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Curiously, the accompanying exhibit placard makes no mention of the ingenious, albeit unorthodox, cooling technique employed that night. This particular narrative remains one of those sagas that the Marine Corps often reserves for its own. For those Marines who inherently grasp that achieving victory in the crucible of combat sometimes necessitates disregarding established protocols, rules that were never conceived for the unique and brutal realities encountered on the battlefield. Those courageous individuals who steadfastly defended Henderson Ridge during that fateful November night were intimately familiar with the unvarnished reality of the situation. They understood that genuine innovation, born from the crucible of extreme duress, occasionally manifests in ways that might be unpleasant to the senses, perhaps even overtly flouting established military regulations. Yet, despite these unconventional aspects, such ingenuity possesses the undeniable power to preserve human lives, altering the course of engagements. This profound, gritty wisdom, while conspicuously absent from any official doctrine or field manual, fundamentally represents a critical lesson that, arguably, ought to be formally documented and integrated into military training. We encourage you to stay with us and watch the end of this video for more compelling stories. We would be incredibly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also share a comment below, letting us know where you are from and your thoughts on the intriguing topic presented in this video.